Okay, so good evening again. Beats and Heartbeats, in tune with reality. The video that you've just seen was a patchwork that was put together by a group of friends whom I am unworthily representing tonight. But it was the attempt to deepen the relationship with the artists that we love. So that's the sort of result that we've come up with. We will try tonight to expand on that with the help of John Waters, who is an Irish writer. He's published a lot of books, a lot of work, and we're planning to use him tonight in his capacity of music critic and obviously friend. And so yeah, I mean the idea is exactly to deepen the relationship with what we've seen, and it's meant to be interactive, so there'll be space for questions at various points during the evening. So whenever we give you access to John, please raise your hand and a microphone will be brought to you in no time. First of all, thank you very much for being here tonight with us, John.
Pleasure.
I jump right into the theme. So in the video you've seen quite a few, right? So the first that I wanted to dwell on a little bit with John was what you've seen in terms of the process of creating a song, of creating a music and creating a record. It sounds like even the musician perceive the song and music as something external for them. So it's something that gets sent to them from some place, right? So this is the first thing that I wanted to ask you about. So I mean, what is it exactly? What's this process?
Well, John Lennon once said something about that the song was given. The song was like Newton, the apple falling on Newton's head, sitting under the tree, and the song would fall down, and there it was, complete. But he also said something quite contradictory almost in the next sentence, where he said that the song was never, at the end, what you thought it was going to be in the beginning. So there's always a sense of the great rock and roll artists of dealing with something which is kind of bigger than them, and not something that is controlled, not something that is, in a sense, constructed by them, that it is a different process that works through them. And you can see touches of this obviously Chris Martin and the others talking about this process is very interesting, and Paul McCartney. But I'm more interested in a way in what happens in the band, in the group around this process, because usually the song kind of makes its entry through one person, through Chris Martin or through Paul McCartney or through John Lennon, whoever it would be. And then the next stage depends on relationships, not so much on musical capacity, technique, ability, but on the nature of relationships. Because something is raw, something, as Eddie Vedder was talking about, the song about his father. Imagine this song and the power of that emotion within him, written perhaps on his own in a hotel room, with his guitar, taken from under the bed, and he begins this process. And then he goes to the rest of the band, and it's very interesting. There's something which is touched on right throughout that video. Of Neil Young talked about it, that they got it first time. They got it. So it's about getting it. It's about getting this thing that is in this song. We often think, because our culture really talks to us in a very reduced way about music and about rock and roll music as much as any other music. It talks to us as if it's simply an entertainment form, and it's about technique, and it's about virtuosity, and it's about showmanship and narcissism and all these things. But actually, at this level, it's operating at the deepest level of the human searching. And you have 4 or 5 or 6 guys in a room who are talking about the deepest, heaviest things, but not in a kind of psychobabble language, not in the language of feelings, not in the language of emotions, not in the language of that is even that is dealing with what's in front of them, but in a technical language which speaks of these things, or with gestures and signs. And so they're pulling something out of each of their hearts and throwing it into the middle. And out of this concoction emerges something that surprises everybody. This is really an amazing thing to see and to be involved in, as I've a little experience of. It's a really amazing process that is like quite unexpected. There's a story about U2 and the song Where the Streets Have No Name, which I think tells the story really beautifully, how that song came into being. I mean, the idea of the song was around, and the title was around. And Brian Eno was the producer, and one day he said, okay, let's do this song now. But Bono said, well, I haven't written the words yet. And Eno said, well, can you write something, anything? And just anything that will fill in, so you can go to the microphone, sing it, and the band can play, and we'll get the backing track done at least. So Bono said, okay, and he went into a corner and scribbled out some words on a page and said, okay, I've got something now. And he came back in, and they did the track, like Neil Young says, in one take. Immediately, everybody got it. And they were listening back afterwards, and Bono said, it sounds good, you know, it's going to be really good when it's finished. And Eno turned to him and says, what do you mean when it's finished? It's finished. You know, it's perfect. You've done it. You know, and it was out of that spontaneity of the moment and the pressure to actually just produce something simple and straightforward that created this song, which has lasted for over 25 years now, nearly 30 years. It's so there's something, you know, I think that this video really captures something really, you know, that you don't get in the normal course of, I can say this about it because I wasn't actually involved in producing the video, and it's really a beautiful video, I think, that it captures something really extraordinary that we don't hear about in the conventional discourse about pop music, about rock and roll, about these forms, which always kind of downplays the question, always kind of avoids the question, you know. Like there was an interview yesterday in The Guardian with Van Morrison, a very rare phenomenon, and everybody would love to read a new interview with Van Morrison, but the interview was really dreadful because it really just went back to, you know, what records did you listen to as a child? So he talks a bit about Leadbelly and Muddy Waters and Lonnie Donegan. And you want him to say, well, yeah, but what were they about? Well, what attracted you about them? It's like as if it's obvious. It's obvious that what all these people are doing is already, you know, clear to everybody, when in fact you can see from this, it's not clear. It's not obvious. These guys are dealing with something deep within themselves, and they're using an idiom which is so dismissed and so patronized, but they're using it in such an explosive way that it communicates heart to heart with somebody out there in their bedroom, out there at the far end of the auditorium, out there at the far end of the field, you know, and it carries that signal heart to heart that is so precious to a young person with so many vulnerable moments in their lives. They hear this, like Eddie Vedder speaking about this deep wound in himself, you know, and he conveys it. And it's really, it's like the Oscar Wilde thing, you know, in many ways. It's just struck me that line of Rowan Williams in the introduction to The Happy Prince, the special edition. How is it that the brokenness of one heart can heal another? This is what rock and roll is about. It's about the brokenness of one heart healing the other. It's always, because it comes from the blues, it comes from gospel, it comes from these forms which were rooted in the deep, deep pain of people in the rawest of situations. You know, the slaves hollering to one another across the plantations, and their hollers, their shouts turned into chants, which became lines, which became songs, which became the blues. And that's what's really at stake. That, you know, and it's really fascinating to see how everybody in that movie knows that, but they're avoiding something. They're careful in the words they use out of their songs, out of the music. They want to be careful because two things: they don't want it to overtalk it, and also they don't want to be misunderstood and be categorized, be pigeonholed.
But nevertheless, I think it's kind of refreshing to see them looking up as well as, you know, evolving horizontally in a way.
Yeah.
So when they say that ideas get sent to them, they kind of always, you know, look up a bit. And so, yeah, I found that very striking.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, this is really, it's really interesting, you know, all this stuff, because you can use a word now. Words are such dynamite things that I could use a word now that would turn everybody off about this stuff.
Sure.
You could short circuit the entire discussion by saying something that is just too much of a reduction. It's about the biggest thing. This is the music about the greatest things, about the sweetest things. It's not music that's trying to make a point. It's not trying to make things small. It's trying to make things as big as they can be. So any word you can say is really problematic in a way. You could say, for example, Amy Winehouse, I'm not religious. And I understand exactly what she means by that. And then she goes on to talk about God, and I think I understand what she means by that, what she's trying to get at. Because there was a certain kind of unashamed use of that word by her. And yet she was being cautious, and so was Chris Martin. And so, and yesterday in the interview with Van Morrison, he throws in the word spiritual, but he doesn't elaborate, and he's not asked to elaborate because that's kind of like a landmine in our culture now, which is like, we don't want to go there. Even though that's where the music came from, we don't want to go there. But what does religious mean? What does God mean? What do these words mean? We can't simply decide that they mean what you think or I think. They're whatever the person who hears them. That's the point, that you hear what you hear in your need, in your moment, in your life. And I think that's okay. I think we live in an age when the greatest things, to break out of this box we're in this world, the constructed box of man, what Pope Benedict called the bunker, you need to avoid language in a certain way. You need to kind of avoid giving people words which they will use against you. I remember Heinrich Ball, the German writer, when he was reviewing Václav Havel's letters to Olga, the letters from prison to his wife, he observed the way that Havel constantly came up with new kind of constructs to describe infinite reality. He would talk about the absolute horizon. He would talk about the infinite something. He would talk about the other, the beyond, all these phrases. And Ball noticed this, and he said that actually it's interesting that Havel never uses the name of God. He said, out of courtesy towards God, he refuses to use the word that has been trampled underfoot by politicians. And that's kind of what rock and roll in its modern incarnation is up against as well, because it's actually all these music, when you actually think about all the spiritual music, gospel, blues, they're all fundamentally what you would call in the broadest sense religious music, in the sense that they're about, the origin and destiny of man in all of the space there is, in all of the time there is. And that's how big the music can be. And that's what people hear when they hear those opening notes of a song they love. It's not just a fancy sound. It's not just an exotic sound. It's something that resonates deep with a question inside themselves. That sounds fanciful, but actually that's the only reason it would be attractive. It's the only reason you saw the picture, the scenes of Coldplay doing "Fix You," and that's anybody who's been to a rock concert knows this is a common sight. The ecstasy that people feel, like that's not ordinary. That's nothing everyday. There's something going on in each one of those hearts to make them jump like that, to make them engage with this like that. They're not just doing yoga, it's not like a normal attraction. I mean, I love ice cream, but I don't jump up and down, when I'm eating it. There's something else happening. And it's that something else that we always avoid. And I used to be, I'm a retired music critic. I hate the word critic.
Sorry.
I think critics are clampers who can't drive. So I write about music, I reflect on it. But for a long, long time, I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. I just wanted to be a music writer because it was a cool thing to be. But I hadn't a clue what they did. So I used to imitate the others. Until one day I came across this interview with in a book called Mystery Train by Grail Marcus. He was talking about Elvis Presley. And I came across this sentence which just jumped off the page at me. He was talking about Elvis Presley singing Can't Help Falling in Love with You. And he said, he describing this song, he said he saw him sing it live. And he said when he saw him, he said that he was immediately aware that Elvis Presley had a capacity for affection that was all but superhuman. A capacity for affection that was all but superhuman. And I thought, is that what it is? Is that what he saw? Is that why we are attracted to Elvis? Because that's not like because he swiveled his hips, or it's not because of, even his voice. It's because of the affection that he communicates from his heart to mine. And I thought, yeah, that's it. And Grell Marcus was brave enough to see that and feel it and say it. So this is what we're missing most of the time, and in the conversations we have. That the title of the meeting, of the encounter, Passion for Reality. What does it mean? Let's zero in on this. What does it mean? Passion for reality. Like you couldn't, we live in this bunker in which a passion for reality is the kind of an exaggerated, enthusiasm. It can be that. This is not that. This is like go into reality and see what there is to be passionate about, because you can't but be. If you see it, you cannot be otherwise than passionate. You cannot be otherwise than wondering at this. That's the point. It's not like we suddenly kind of, hey, wow, all the time, Like, that thing of like when you're with somebody and you see something beautiful and they say, wow, it kills it. It kills it because the word is completely inadequate. You can't speak of something beautiful, really. You can't say it. If you could, it wouldn't be beautiful. And that's about rock and roll. Rock and roll and language are really amazing because, and it comes up in this as well, this idea that you can't, everybody can take their own meanings. I mean, I know lots of songs from my teenage years, and I still get I don't know what the words are. My mother and father used to say, I know what that means. I can't make out the words. And I wouldn't tell them, neither could I. And I didn't care, because it wasn't about the words. Although you wouldn't have the music without the words would be nothing in a way. But with the words, it wasn't the sum of the words and the music. It was something else. It was exponential. It was a multiplication. It was, and the words were kind of like not about words. Van Morrison does this. I mean, he always says that the only time he ever deals with words is when he's writing a song, and after that he begins to attack the words. He kind of tries to break them apart, and he like we did this in Rimini a few years ago. We did an exhibition and we used a snatch where he did a song called Cypress Avenue, and I can't, obviously I'm not Van Morrison, but so I just try to convey, he says, the lyric goes, and I'm caught one more time up on Cypress Avenue, and I'm conquered in a car seat. My tongue gets tied every time I try to speak, and my inside shakes like a leaf, just like a leaf on a tree. So he would go with this, and my tongue gets tied every time I try to speak. And he goes after 20, 30 times until he's in kind of almost like a trance. And the words have almost changed meaning and changed sound and changed shape, and there's something different. Like as one critic, it's almost like he's trying to break back through the words, back before words, to the primeval grunts, back to the find, as this brilliant critic said, to try to find the voice of God. And that's the scale of what the great artists in this medium are doing. And nobody ever tells you. Or very rarely do you actually see a clue of this out in the public arena, because it's all people, critics writing like I was writing, copying each other in order to avoid tripping the landmines and actually becoming uncool, because that's the greatest fear we rock critics used to have, was not to be uncool. That was the worst thing. Sorry. So.
Right. Well, let's open it up for questions if there are any. Any questions from the audience? There.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. Just wanted to ask, do you think it's like an individual capacity for every human being to use this mechanism to express, the things your soul experience? Because sometimes we feel like exclusion, because we don't have music talent, or, we might not have a good relationship with instrument, and we think, okay, that's not for me. But maybe like each of us able, to learn this mechanism, and like, do you think it gives musician kind of little freedom in a way for a moment, and we all can reach that? And
Oh yeah, I certainly do, and I mean we did the history of rock and roll shows this very clearly. Like punk rock was that kind of a revolution, and precisely in non-musicianship, and it created some of the most amazing music of the last half century. Brian Eno, the producer that I mentioned, who worked with U2 and Coldplay and Talking Heads and lots of other bands, he has a kind of a thing about the importance of non-musicianship. That he regards musicianship as the greatest thing to be overcome in making an original record, original recording, because the tendency of the accomplished musician is to resort to cliche, to fall into something that's already been done, a pattern that's already established, whereas the non-musician, in his articulateness, seeks a path that has not been walked upon. This is a great excuse, by the way, for somebody like me who can hardly play anything. You know, but it's also true that Brian Eno, like what he brings to the bands that he works with, is to bring out of them their inarticulateness and their stupidity and the things that don't have to do with competence and proficiency and virtuosity, because they're in a way they're the enemy of creativity. You know, there's another story told about U2. Like when in the beginning, when the band got together, there were the four original members. There remained the four players, who more or less who since then. There were some people who turned up for auditions, but they kind of disappeared on the first day, I think. But there was a problem with Adam Clayton, because he even though he looked like a rock star already on the first day, and he was a very nice guy, and he had a bass guitar, he couldn't play it. He couldn't play a note. But the rest of the band liked him so much that they didn't want to sack him. So they decided they would keep him on. And in order to compensate for his lack of musicianship, Edge started to develop a guitar style to fill in the gaps around Adam's appalling bass playing. And he started with this, which then became U2's kind of trademark sound right up to Octone Baby. That was the sound, that was the Edge's guitar style. And the reason that Edge developed his original guitar sound was because Adam couldn't play. So really you can, and you go right to a punk and you see, I mean, a lot of it is just about the confidence to actually be able to express in whatever way, whatever limited way. And I think this is true of any art form, you know, whether it's painting or literature or poetry, anything, that you need to have the confidence to break through your incapacity. And then that's when you actually create the original thing. Because once you learn to do things, there's always a danger that you just repeat something that's already been there. That was a big problem in Ireland, particularly because we had a kind of a big bang. We never really had a pop tradition. We had a big bang of what we call show bands, who were just copycat bands, were like human jukeboxes. And they were very good musicians, and they just played what everybody else created. But they couldn't write any songs, or most of them couldn't. So I don't think that you can actually exaggerate the importance of understanding what you ask is correct. You just need to have the desire and to be sure, to find in yourself the certainty to express in whatever limited way you can. Because in those studio situations, you know, I've been in studios with people who couldn't play, who wrote songs, and who conveyed their songs in a very minimalist way to musicians, who then translated them into their own way of speaking, their own way of expressing. And they were some of the greatest songs you would hear. So, yeah, that's right. Don't worry about not being able to play. It's a good thing.
The other thing I wanted to touch on was it came out through what you said so far and through the video as well. The thing about making music together, and this is I think there are at least a couple of aspects to that. So one is actually increasing the number of the stakeholders to the song or to the record, right? So it goes from the band, the producer, it becomes public property at one point, and then it gets to the extreme of actually, giving you back something, like we've seen in the video from in the bit from Eddie Vedder, describing the song Alive.
Yeah. Yeah, again, that kind of alchemy that happens in a studio situation, and can happen live as well, but it's a different thing when it happens live because the song already exists. But it can happen in a situation where a mood is created out of like just a phrase or a set of words or an arpeggio on a guitar or piano. It's something, a mood is generated, and that tells you that the musician is not actually what we like to be. He's not a virtuoso. That's not what the musician fundamentally is. The musician is a human being who has access to a tool out of which he can express something from here. And the best musicians are the ones who can get that expression right in accordance with what is before them, not just to play something that fits, but something that is of the thing. And that's the amazing thing, that a lot of when you hear something that is new, that is, I don't mean new in the sense of novelty. You know that moment when you actually are in a cafe or in some public place and something comes up and you hear it in a record shop and you say, "What's that? What's that?" That's, you're attracted to this. Why? Because it's not that it's what? It's not that it's like a nice tune or it's something else. It's something that it's speaking about something else, something that somebody else knows that you know. They know it. How do they know this? This is the question you have. How do they know this? How does anybody know this? So this happened to me many times where I go then to the counter and say, "What's that? What's that? Who is this?" And then you start to follow this artist and follow the song. And how do they know these things? And that's going back to my own experience, my very first time to hear T-Rex. The song that switched me on to all this was an English band called T-Rex. And the song was Ride a White Swan. And to this day, I don't know what the words are about. But it's a magical place, a magical sound, a magical personality that is attractive to me, that is part of me, that I recognized as soon as I heard it. So what's going on in that studio is really something, they're generating something that is magical, that comes from someplace else. And all of them, the great artists know it, the great musicians know it. Many musicians whom you've never heard of are great artists. Some are not. They're just technicians, and that's fine sometimes. If you're playing in a live band especially, you need technicians, you need technically good musicians. But in a studio, you need a different thing. You need an alchemist. And so it's not surprising when you get it back. The song is completely different. And an artist like Bob Dylan has kind of given a new life to this idea, because several times in the course of his career, he's gone away and he's learned a new trick. He wouldn't be a great musician himself, he'd be the first to tell you. But he goes off and he learns a new trick. And then he applies this trick to all of his past songs. So that's why when you hear it, it's half over. The song's nearly over when people begin to recognize it. You know that when you're at a Bob Dylan concert and he's into the 14th verse and then people start to applaud. Oh, yeah, I got it now. I know, I know which one it is. Because he kind of recognizes that he can do that thing as well, of hearing his own music and reinventing it and giving it a new meaning. And through his whole life, he's done that with songs. They've actually changed. Like a song like The Times They Are Changing, which was like used as an anthem of youth rebellion in the 60s, is now kind of an ironic, kind of jaded realism when he sings it. When he does it now, it's got a new meaning, and it's almost like sending up the original sense of revolution, because he's got this sense that revolutions never happen, never really work. They never really realize themselves. So what are you dealing with? You're dealing with something, again, and it's important not to say it, overstate it. Like, there's a lot of dangers talking about rock and roll. And when we did the exhibition in Rimini, this was our kind of thing, that we would talk about it once just to say it, because I had this theory that everybody kind of knew it anyway. They knew what they were listening to. They knew why they were listening to it. But they never heard anybody else mention it, so they thought it was just them, that they were picking up all this stuff and nobody else was, so they didn't talk about it, because it might be embarrassing if people said, "No, what, sorry? No, No, I just like it. It's like some artists actually play to that idea. Like Springsteen has he can be really brittle and mellow, say in Nebraska, and then he's born in the USA. And that kind of dualism kind of works for rock and roll in a certain way, that it allows certain deniability about the heaviness that people feel. You don't have to own up to it all the time. And I kind of think that in a strange way, this is a really unique medium in the modern world, where it's like something that sneaks into town, like almost in a Trojan horse. This kind of heart thing, this deep heaviness, that it's something that sneaks and it just comes out in the middle of the square in the bunker and catches people by surprise. And everybody can say, yeah, I like that, but you don't have to say why. That's great. Yeah. That's cool. But you don't have to say why. But everybody knows why. For them, and the why in every case is different, and the why in every case is the same. So that's how heavy it is. And that it's almost like a medium which has developed precisely for the conditions of the modern world, for that reason, that we can't talk about certain things, that we have to pretend that everything is boxed, everything is explainable, everything is, there's no mystery.
And yet once they've sung it, it's there, so,
It's there, yeah, and you recognize it.
Yeah.
You feel it, and that's enough. You don't even have to put words on it. In fact, maybe you shouldn't put words on it. Maybe we shouldn't be talking about it, because we can scare it off by talking it, by naming it. And I think that's true as well. That's the whole thing. Like John Lennon said that nobody had ever improved on Bebopalula, and that's probably true as well.
And what about, being as available as the example of Alive? So, the audience is actually changing the meaning of what you put to your own song.
Yeah.
And you take it on. So you're kind of available to see that. Right?
That's an amazing story, that, because it's like a resurrection. It's like a redemption. That he didn't see this. Amazing that you can write a song, and I can believe that. I can believe that he could have written that song and not see that flipping of the phrase over, because of where he saw the song from, where he made the song from. And then people sing it and they hear it differently. That's an amazing thing. That is his redemption for him. Well, that is one of the most beautiful stories I've heard in this context.
I think that relates a little bit with the next theme, and then I'll open up to questions again. And so singers speak about the need to be broken, so to be vulnerable, right?
Mm.
So I think that plays a part in even in being able to to lift your head, to look at the audience and see how they are reacting to whatever you've already written. And what's this being vulnerable? The availability to be broken.
I think we are all broken, and we all think that our brokenness is perhaps unique to us, which it might be in a way, but it's also shared by others, by everybody. And yet we only talk about it in certain ways and in certain contexts. So that the artist is somebody who celebrates the brokenness, who is not afraid of it, who is prepared to walk into the light, showing his wound. And that's vital for me, and it's vital, for my child. It's vital to me to know that my child can hear this, and that there is an access to this from somebody that she admires, who can speak in this language that she can hear, and that isn't afraid. Like, that's really important for us, because so much of what we try to do in this bunker is to hide away the pain, hide away the casualties, hide away the reality of our lives, which, as the exhibition and Oscar Wilde says, is sorrow. Sorrow is the essence of the human experience. And that is not that if you say that in a TV or radio interview, people think you're depressed, whatever that is. you know. But sadness is the natural state of man in exile. You know, it's a natural thing to be missing, to have a nostalgia for something that you cannot remember. That's the state of us. That is our condition. And you know, music is like that. Even the sound of it. I mean, it's hard sometimes to tell the original from the copy. Very often, you know, you can be a great musician, you can be a great band, you can be a very successful band, and by and large, you can simply, you know, draw your inspiration directly from another source. But behind that, there's another source and another source. And eventually you hear something which is like a nostalgia for something that nobody remembers. And if you go back to the original rock and roll, that's what it was. Elvis was that. Elvis was speaking that nostalgia. Because even though he had precursors, he was still standing on a new frontier. You know, the black and white meeting in this kind of what Bono called this spastic dance. So the brokenness of the human is it's the story. Our culture, our bunker culture, tells us the brokenness is an aberration, that it is something that a mishap, something happened, things went wrong, you had an accident, you were taking the wrong drugs, you were taking them with the wrong people, whatever. Nobody tells you that to be broken is to be human. And this is really at the heart of this music, of the blues, is the brokenness. The blues is brokenness. And to the extent that the music is authentic, to the extent that it is truthful to its tradition and to its past, it is still about the brokenness of the human.
And here it's the key to understand yourself and to understand reality. Some more questions. Yeah. Over here.
Hi, John. I've got a question about something that was just mentioned about authenticness. I don't know if your daughter's still a teenager, but I have a teenage daughter, and there's a few of us in the front row with teenagers. And I try and listen to, or to perceive some kind of authenticity in the lyrics I hear coming out of the bedroom. The first concert I went to, I was very privileged. I went to U2 when I was 17 here in Wembley, and there was something deeply profound about In the Name of Love. And I just wonder what your take is on the modern lyrics. When I say modern, what our kids are listening to, which seems to me much more about their physicality and what one can do to the other or not, and how they dress. And it doesn't mean you're a hoe and I'm going to love you anyway, etc., etc. I don't want to go down the line too much, but do you see any authenticity in what our teenagers are listening to? Is my question.
Well, I think you've got to trust that what they hear is something that attracts them. I mean, I would say that as a parent or as a rock critic, a lot of the stuff that I hear wouldn't do anything for me. But I wouldn't necessarily come to the conclusion that they hear it the same way as I hear it. So I think you have to give the benefit of whatever doubt there is to the possibility that what they're hearing is layered and that there are multiple layers of irony and understanding in it. I mean, having said that, I do think, as I said, rock and roll has generated a lot of copycats. The lifestyle is very attractive to a certain kind of person. You can become a competent, even a brilliant musician, technically. You can become very successful, and there are a lot of those bands around who are not, in my view, the real thing. But that doesn't mean that somebody else doesn't hear them in a certain way. Like I was actually in America a couple of years ago when we were touring this exhibition thing. A man actually was talking about the fact that his son was into death metal. And he eventually came to realize that he was into Mozart and his son was into death metal. And you can imagine that's not conducive to a lot of communication, But he actually talked to his son, and he actually realized that his son got from death metal what he got from Mozart. That's a really hard one to kind of accept. But, there was some study there a few years ago as well, which kind of came to the same conclusion. They did, they actually asked people with different tastes in music they wire them up in whatever way they do, and they found that the results, if you were into, you know, Led Zeppelin or Deep Purple, and they wired you up, and with somebody else into Mozart and they wired you up, that the neurological responses were pretty similar, which was quite surprising, because, you know, that isn't to say that Led Zeppelin is indistinguishable from Mozart by any means, but it means that actually the human person responds to different things, but that the same capacity for experience based on attraction is there in everybody. And that I think that's important to remember, much as we might hate the noise coming out of the bedroom. Anyway, it changes. I mean, you know, people grow, and you have to start somewhere, you know. And some people hate country music, you know, for example. I actually love country music, and you know, I can't talk to people who don't get it because they think it's serious. You know, I would be worried if it was serious, but it's actually not serious. It's something else. There's a deep irony about country music pretty much all the time.
Okay, probably last question. Any more? Yeah, over there. No.
Good evening. I want to just put a contrast up and mention that when I was at the Tate Modern, I saw the famous paintings by Rothko, and I was like completely taken to another place, and it was amazing, and everyone who saw them felt the same way. But the fact is, to me personally, music remains possibly the most incredible art form. So could you maybe say a little bit more about why is it that music seems to transcend literature, art, those beautiful graphics of the book in the other exhibition that you mentioned earlier? You know, what is it about music that just takes us somewhere else and sort of maybe add to what we saw on the video?
Okay.
Thank you.
I think it's a language that isn't a language, in a way. It's a language that is not about words or not about necessarily about notes. It's about something that comes from deep within the psyche of the person, of the human person. There's a play on, if you're in Dublin the next 3 weeks, go to the Gate Theatre. There's a play called The Geely Concert, which is incredible, by Ireland's greatest living playwright, Tom Murphy. And it's an amazing story of a guy who's he's a builder and developer, who goes to a guy who's kind of a psychoanalyst. He sees his sign and says everything is possible. And he goes and he's overcome by this periodic sadness. Some would call it depression, but he's been spending his nights listening to Geely, the Italian tenor, on the record with his headphones as his wife and children sleep. And he tells the psychoanalyst, whatever, he's called himself a dynamitologist, he tells him his ambition is to sing like Geely, that he thinks this will be the resolution of his humanity, that will reside in this achievement, to sing the feeling and aspiration that he feels within himself and can't express in words. And it's really amazing because you can see the character does it, you know, in I don't mean he achieves it, but he conveys what is behind it, like, because he's inarticulate. The words he's like, fuck it, fuck, and then he goes, he tries to get a note from underneath this blurt of inarticulateness. There's a note that sort of forces its way up through, and you can see there's a kind of a peace that comes on him in this, even in this clumsy ejaculation of a note. And I think that there is a part of us that is submerged, which language doesn't plumb, that only music plumbs, and that out of this we can find expression, and that's what we hear. When we hear something, it doesn't matter, whatever attracts us, when we hear it, this is what is connected, this is the connection that is made, and there is a circuitry, so that we're speaking through this music, to ourselves, to the world. And I think that's what it is.
Okay, there was there one more question here? Before? No? Hands up. Any other questions? Okay, then we wrap it up. Thank you very much, John, for being here and for being so available to speak about these things. We wanted to leave you with one of the songs that were the heart of the video and of our work. So we'll project some more music before closing up. Thank you very much, everybody.
I'm still alive. Just to say an enormous thank you to Gigi and to John for a fantastic evening. Thinking we should adopt this song as the anthem of the London Encounter 2015. No, but seriously, thank you. It's been wonderful to help to have you kind of, in a sense, lead us through this evening, and to discover more the nature of reality. And I think that's true of everything that we've seen today, in all the talks, in all of the exhibitions. As I said at the beginning, we really wanted today to be an opportunity to discover a little bit more the true nature of reality. And I was really struck, John, by something that you said, that when we discover reality as it is, we can't help but fall in love with it. We can't help discover this passion for it. And again, I think that's something that we've seen throughout the day. So just to say, as the day draws to a close, an enormous thank you to everyone that's helped make today possible. All of the speakers, the huge team of volunteers that's helped, everyone who's been involved in planning and working on the exhibitions. I'd like to thank again our sponsors, in particular Tratos, our official sponsor. What we would like to do, this is the second time that we've done this London Encounter. We would like to make it an annual event. So diaries at the ready. The plan is for the London Encounter to happen again next year, 2016, on the 11th of June. So that's the plan. 11th of June, 2016. We'll obviously send out more details near the time in the coming months. But as I say, the idea is that the London Encounter could be something that happens in a new way each year. What I'd really like to ask you is to, in a sense, also help with the London Encounter by spreading the word. So telling friends, colleagues, families about today, and then inviting them next year. If you're not on our mailing list, you can give your email address at the welcome desk as you leave. Just to say that the event will close at 9 o'clock tonight, so you have a little bit more time. If anyone does want to see the exhibitions you haven't had a chance to yet, then there is opportunity to have a very quick visit. Also just to say that the book, The Happy Prince, is still available for sale, and also the London Encounter t-shirt. So thank you to everyone for coming and making today so special, and I hope to see you again next year.